Karen, he's coming.
Yeah. If it's okay with you, David and JR, Larry's going to record this so we can share it with the rest of our class. Is that all right?
Sure.
No problem.
If we say anything stupid, we're going to ask to retract that, but
Okay. I met JR and David through the alumni chapter. We've got a pretty proactive chapter here in Minnesota. It's kind of been an evolutionary process, but JR was a big part of it. He was president and really decided that we were going to do a lot of really neat things for our alumni in the area and within the community. We ended up winning a chapter award for that, for the work that we were doing back in those days. But in addition to some of the work that the chapter was doing, I was busy in the Blue and Gold program. And one of the things that I set up for the parents of the kids that were either at the academy or applying to the academy is we would have once a year an event where we brought in graduates to talk about their career paths and whether they stayed in the service or whether they moved on and tried different ventures along the way. And JR and David were a couple of people that I brought in to chat to the parents, and they'll talk a little bit more about that. But from that time forward, we've had a really good relationship. When I asked them if they'd be interested in speaking at the Book and Bourbon Club, they were more than willing to do that and share their thoughts and their inspirations and their challenges along the way. So we're pleased to have them. What we'll do with the group that we have, if you have a question, we'll let them do an introduction first. And then if you have questions along the way, you can, just volunteer in. We'll identify the question, the questionnaire, probably with the loudest voice, and then move on and make sure that everybody has a chance to get their questions answered. But I'll turn it over to JR and David at this time, but we're thrilled to have them on board. Thanks, you guys.
sure. You want to start, JR?
I'll let you go. Age before beauty.
Yeah, sure. So I was class of 88. My wife was actually class of 89 and JR was class of 90. So as Chip mentioned, the way we got started, I had stopped. I got out in 94. I was a nuke for 6 years, got out in 94 and was in the private sector. And in 2013, I walked away from a job and came home. And after a week of driving my wife crazy, she said, "You got to find something to do." I started writing a book. So I did that for about a year. I wrote a couple of science fiction books. And as Chip mentioned, JR and I were invited to speak to a parents club meeting in Lakeville, Minnesota in April of 2014. So we go to this meeting. It's on a Sunday morning. And I give my bio. It's, I was in for 6 years, submarines, got out. I was 20 years in high tech, walked away from that. And, now I write books. And JR gives his bio. Now, JR and I knew each other. We were friends, but we never really talked about in detail what we did when we were in the service. So he starts talking. He was 21 years as a career naval intel officer. So he starts talking about all the stuff he's done. And he was on the intel staff at SOCOM, and he was a CIA trained case officer on the ground in Bosnia. He was off on large deck amphibs and aircraft carriers. And he goes on for like 15 minutes, and the whole room is like, "Holy cow, this guy's done a lot of stuff." And then one of the people in the audience raises their hand. They say, "You two should get together and write a book." And I'm sitting there thinking, that's a really good idea. So I always wanted to write a Tom Clancy type book, but I had been out since 94. So this is 20 years. And I just didn't feel like I had the chops to do it and have the authenticity. So I asked him out to lunch the next week. And we're having lunch, and finally I asked him the question, and he says, "Man, I was hoping you're going to ask me that." He says, "I got a great idea for a first book, That was in April, May 2014. And about a year later, this book, Weapons of Mass Deception, was born. So it took about a year to write it. We learned a lot of how to write a book together. I mean, I had written a book on my own, but writing a book together is an entirely different experience. It's something sort of like getting married. I've done it a couple of times, not the married part, the book writing part. We did manage to get through that first book. We figured out how to get an editor. We figured out how to get a cover designer. We crowdfunded it and released it in I think it was May or June of 2015. So we had only planned to do one book together, and after that was done, we're like, well, that was kind of cool. You want to do it again? Yeah, sure. What should the next book be about? I don't know. What do you think the next book ought to be about? So that one came about. We were reading the newspaper, and at that time in Minnesota, there was a ton. There was dozens, let's say, of young Somali men getting radicalized and going off to fight for ISIS and Al-Shabaab. Now, these were young men who had been born in this country, had never been to Somalia, had never been to Turkey, been to Syria, and they were getting convinced to leave everything behind, leave their families, and get on a plane and go. And in most cases, they didn't tell their families; they just didn't show up. Was really an interesting process. We worked with what class is E.K. Wilson?
Yeah, E.K. Wilson was class of '87. He was actually did 5 years as a SWO. Actually earned a private pilot's license, but went into the FBI. And E.K. was the supervisory special agent in charge of the investigations into the Somali Americans and young Americans heading off to join Al-Shabaab. And they prosecuted those guys very, very successfully here in Minnesota. Not a single one of them went to trial because they had them all dead to rights. But EK served as a technical advisor for us on the FBI side and helped introduce us to some members of the Somali American community. And we actually sat down and had some face-to-face meetings with those individuals, including a guy who works for the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department and one of his buddies who actually spent 9 years in the Air Force. And that was a very interesting lunch, talking with the two of them about their community and this challenge that they faced of some of these young men heading off to join Al-Shabaab. David might want to talk a little bit more about that lunch.
Yeah, so from that process came our second book, Jihadi Apprentice, which actually takes place mostly here in Minnesota. Jared mentions the lunch. So we were meeting with these people and not really sure what to make of it, but we're having lunch with this guy. He'd been in the Air Force. He owned a restaurant. He was obviously a very together guy, and his I think it was a cousin of his was one of these kids who just went to high school one day and just didn't come home. And then he called from Turkey and he says, I'm going to fight for ISIS in Syria. And his family's just devastated. And we said to the guy, we said, so why do you think this is happening? And he says to us, for real? We said, yeah. He says, I think it's dark magic. And we're like, what?
We're waiting for the punchline, right?
Yeah. And we sort of walked away from the lunch and we realized that they have no idea why it's happening. They really have no idea.
Yeah.
So they're sort of reaching for these supernatural kind of discussions, but they were being self-radicalized. And it was a really interesting process. Wrote that book, finished it, crowdfunded it again, editor, book cover designer, crowdfunded. And then we said, well, why don't we do it again? So we're about most of the way through writing this book, Rules of Engagement. So title, Rules of Engagement. Cover is a line drawing of a submarine. Just what do you think the book's about? Chip, don't answer this.
Yeah. I've already read it, so I won't say anything either.
Yeah. So it's not about submarines.
No.
Let me just give you the punchline up front. So we're this is end of 2016, beginning of 2017, and JR says, you know what? Why don't we try to get an agent and get a, like a New York publishing contract and, get the real money. And initially I was like, we got a good thing going here. We know how to write books. We know how to produce books. Why? And so we talked about it. And finally, there was a pitch conference in Minneapolis in April. So that was a couple of months away. And we were mostly done with the book. We needed to get it edited. So I agreed to go and pitch it at a pitch conference is just what it sounds like. You pay your couple $100, you go and there's some workshops, but the real thing is you get 10 minutes with 3 different agents during the course of the day. And so wouldn't you know it, I go to the pitch conference. As soon as I said the words North Korea in my pitch, they're like, stop, send me sample. So from those 3, 2 of them were very interested. And then we had a third, another agent come in who was with a friend of ours who writes submarine thrillers, Rick Campbell. He's class of 85, I think. We eventually, so from that was April, by the end of May, we had an agent, and I was going away for a writing seminar in the summer. And we basically agreed with the agent. We said, we're only interested in major publishing houses because we know what we can do commercially on our own. And we're only interested in a big advance. And we're only going to give you a couple of months because, the book's done. So by September, he had a verbal offer and a couple of months. So by the beginning of January in 2018, we signed a contract with St. Martin's Press, part of Macmillan, for 2 books. It was a good deal, gave us a big check. Everything seemed awesome. The book did not come out until June of 2019. So they buy well in advance. And that's just the process. So they bought the book. They changed actually very little of the book after they bought it. So the editorial process took 2 months maybe. And basically the rest of the time was waiting around. The first book was, our experience with them was pretty good. They're a huge company, so it's difficult to communicate with them. On things like the cover, when they sent us the cover, they're like, well, and we gave the feedback, well, this is a book about cyber warfare, and why would you want to put a submarine on the cover of a book about cyber warfare? And their answer was, submarines sell. So we're like, well, you guys, you guys know what you're doing. We're just the newbies here, and you're writing the check. So, okay, submarines sell. We finished the next book, turned it in the beginning of January 2019 or 20? 19.
19, yeah.
19. And it took a year.
Over
I
a year.
kid you not, a year to get editorial feedback. And the editorial feedback was, you need to make the beginning shorter, which I could have told them that before I turned it in. So we finished that. It came out in September of 2020 it's a book about bioweapons. Of course, for a book about bioweapons, you have a line drawing of a V-22 Osprey on the cover because naturally. So the Pandora Deception came out in September of 2020. I don't think they spent $1 on promotion. To be fair to them, it was the middle of a pandemic. One thing we learned about traditional publishers is they make their money off of the hardcover sales immediately after release. So that's why the ebook is priced obscenely, because they want you to buy the hardcover.
And David, I'll just jump in here. One of the experiences that we faced, we assumed signing on with a major publishing house that they would have a really good process for bringing these books to market. And so we're about 6 months away from the launch of Rules of Engagement. And David and I reached out to him and said, we just want to make sure that we're doing everything we are supposed to do as authors to do our part in getting this book launched. Can we have a conference, conference call with all of you guys to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do? And so we get on that conference call and they're like, well, what do you want to talk about? And so David and I are like, well, we're sort of type A people. We're trained to lead. We have lived our lives by checklists to make sure we don't miss something in the process. We assume you guys have some sort of a checklist as we ramp up towards launching the book. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And they said, we're really kind of a bunch of liberal arts majors, and we just sort of know what needs to happen when, and we'll let you know what we need when we need it. It blew our minds, honest to God, because now you see how a major publishing house works. And then as we got closer to launch, we realized nobody's in charge of this process.
Yeah.
They outsource all kinds of stuff. They must have had 40 people working on launching some aspect of our book. No wonder they're going under these traditional publishing houses.
So there's about 4 traditional publishing houses today, but there's a bunch of smaller independent publishers like the one we're currently with that have different business models, that have different levels of responsiveness, which we've been actually really happy with.
Yeah.
I mean, because they paid a lot of money for our books, and the last one they didn't even really promote it at all. Nope. They just released it, and and it was out there. So in the fall of 2020, after the book was released, our contract was done. They paid us everything that they owed us, and they didn't offer us another contract, and we probably wouldn't have taken it. Nope. We just weren't real happy with the process, because what we finally, the conclusion we finally came to is what they were interested in was selling a book in hardcover, as many copies as possible, as soon as possible after launch. And what we were really interested in was finding readers who wanted to read a whole series. And those two things were just fundamentally different. Again, financially, it was good for us, but from the perspective of what we wanted to do with our writing careers, wasn't really in alignment. So it was our brush with the big time, but we sort of walked away from that. So then, JR, you want to talk about Severn River and Andrew?
Yeah, so Andrew Watts had actually reached out to David about, it was about your sci-fi series, right?
Yeah, I had met him at a conference about a year or so before, and we kept in touch intermittently. He's a 2003 grad.
Yeah, and he had actually partnered up with a West Point grad, and they started this company called Severn River Publishing, and they're both authors themselves. And so Andrew sort of put the press on David. David reached out to me, explained to me what they were looking for. They were hoping for something along the lines of a 6-book series, a new series design. And we weren't too sure if we wanted to sign on for that. But we went back and forth with Andrew for a while, and we finally agreed to do it, especially once we had reached back to St. Martin's Press and got the thumbs up from them that we could continue to use all of those characters that we had developed in those 2 books we wrote for St. Martin's Press going forward into the new 6-book series. They were perfectly fine with that. And once we had that in writing from them, Andrew Watts settled down about the legal concerns that he had for that. And we jumped in and signed a 6-book deal with Severn River Publishing. And it was supposed to be to deliver a new book every 6 months. That is a bit of a pace, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So the first one came out in January, Command and Control, which I think is the topic of tonight. And the follow-on one came out in February. So we actually wrote them in 2021, and they held on to them and published them essentially back to back. So Command and Control is about a Russian deception that stretches the U.S. military all over the globe, and there's something that goes on at the end, which I can't talk about. And book 2 is about Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So they've done extremely well. We've been really happy. Severn River Publishing knows what they're doing. They understand their market. They understand how to market. I reached out to him earlier in the week and told him we had this conversation and said, can you give us an idea of how many books we sold? He says, you probably sold about 30,000 copies since January, which is more than we've sold in any other books. Actually, all of our books combined, probably. And that's a combination of book sales, print, ebook, and if anybody's familiar with the Kindle Unlimited program. So that's a combination of Kindle page reads with that and translated back into equivalent books, I guess. So we can tell that people are reading it because the books have well over 1,000 reviews, both of them. So that's you typically, rule of thumb is it's about 100 readers for 1 review is typically what you see on books. So that sort of tracks with the numbers that Andrew gave us. So we've been really happy with them. We just turned in book 3, which comes out in the fall. It's called Order of Battle, and it's about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So clearly we got our timing wrong on Taiwan and Ukraine as we were spinning things up. The other thing, and I'll let JR talk about this, is the other books, as you can kind of tell from the way we talked about them, is we would write a book and then we'd say, okay, that one's done. What do you want to write about next? We took a different approach on this series. You want to talk about it, JR?
Yeah, we actually had written what we thought was going to be book 5, even before book 4, which was the Pandora's Deception, launched. We had that one kind of done and in the bag, and we were trying to decide what to do with it. And when Seven River Publishing approached David and we started having a dialogue with them, David and I realized that manuscript could actually be broken into 2 separate books, which is what became Command and Control and Counterstrike. And the whole story was leading naturally into this 3rd book in this opening trilogy, which is Order of Battle. I mean, it was like almost like sort of fate, you know, it just sort of fell perfectly into place for us to split that manuscript into these 2 stories and to flesh them out a little bit more. And they went very, very quickly. Order of Battle came together very, very quickly, and we're already, I mentioned to Larry and Chip before everybody else got on, that we are pretty much have the whole story outlined for the next novel, what will be our 8th novel, the 4th novel for Seven River Publishing. And that one is called Threat Axis. And that manuscript is actually due October 1st.
Whoa. You're under the gun.
Yeah. So I guess at this point we can open it up to questions and hazing.
Hazing?
Chip, I'll let you moderate questions.
Chip,
Go ahead, Michael.
hey, I've got a comment and a question or maybe a question and a complaint. The complaint first is that the first book was outstanding and it was so exciting. I read book 2. As you get to be 70 years old, your memory fades. Book 3, I look for it and I realized I'm gonna have to read book 1 and book 2 over again so I could keep up with book 3. I can't wait for it to come out, and you guys did a great job. The question I have is the sketchy character Admiral Surratt that's in the book. I called Chip and I asked him, and I emailed him. He's been really evasive. Where do you kiss a woman on the nape of her neck that sends shivers all up and down her body? Because whenever, Chip, you gotta help us out here.
What did they tell you, Mike?
That's entirely for David to explain. He writes all the sex scenes.
Yeah, so we should talk a little bit about the process here. So
Yeah.
having written how many books together now? 7. 7 books together. Here's and we've literally tried every single way to do this. So this is how it works now. So we get together and we talk about what the story is, who's the characters, what's going to be the main event, and we might talk about this for a month or 2, just kicking ideas around. And then when we get serious, we sit down and we say, okay, talk through it. Okay, so this is what happens in the beginning. This is the inciting incident. You know, bomb blows up or whatever. And so we try to talk through the whole thing, and we try to get the big events that are going to be key throughout the plot. And when we can tell the whole story end to end, at least a version of it, then we sit down and we go and we make a chapter by chapter outline. So chapter 1, this is what's going to happen. This is the point of view. This is the location. This is the time of day. This is what's going to happen. Any notes we need, and we do that all through. Usually our books are 60 some chapters, so we do that 1 to 60. With Seven River, they actually have a developmental editor, and we send it to him, and he looks at it and he says, well, you didn't do this, and you need more of this character, because we write multiple points of view, so it can get pretty complex. Once we have that and we're happy with it, I go to work. So I write the first draft, And there's some chapters where, you know, it's a situation room or whatever, and we know what's going to happen. So I just write it. So every day I send JR a chapter. Usually our chapters are roughly 2,000 words, so 8 to 10 pages, something like that. He looks at it, he sends it back. I just put it in a file. If there's chapters that are very technical, JR does a much more detailed outline. If we need to get a technical advisor, like on this last book, we needed help because there's a lot of scenes in tanks, M1A1 Abrams tanks. So we got actually a West Point guy to help us with that. And he was very helpful. He read the chapters, and I watched an obscene amount of YouTube videos about military. My search history is a total mess. The FBI is going to show up one day. So once we have the whole book, I write linearly, first of all, 1 to 60. I don't jump around. JR sees it the first day, it comes back, it goes in a file. Once it comes back and we think we've got the whole thing, I go through it again and I consolidate it into one file. And then we go through it together. We edit it together. And we say, we need more of this. What about this? This doesn't work. Move this over here, all that kind of stuff. And at that point, it goes off to an editor. The editor does copy editing, line editing, misspelling, awkward things. This character's eyes were blue in chapter 2 and they're green in chapter 16. This guy was tall in chapter 3 and he's a midget in chapter 18. You know, because you get, there's just a lot of stuff. The other thing that happens is, and this is where JR's expertise happens. So when I'm stuck on technical details, I'll just bracket it and say, you know, Navy SEAL rushes into a room, he pulls out his sidearm, and I have in brackets whatever a Navy SEAL would carry, and he fills all that stuff in, right? So I don't have to slow down to do it. And that's kind of how it works. It's a pretty efficient process now. It was not efficient when we started. As far as you know, sex scenes, well, I mean, you know, my wife and I do a lot of labs, so you know, we sort of work things out, and then and then just go. It's just fodder for the novel.
David, you guys use
kill you.
you guys use some beta readers for the early books, so you had some of the alums going over your material too, didn't you?
Yeah, so we've used a couple different people. So if we have a book like Counter-Strike had a lot of aviation scenes in it, so we got a friend of JR's to do a technical read for us, and he went into gross detail. Somebody I think picked up that we had screwed up something about helicopter controls, so we apologize about that. We did fix that, by the way. So you're the only one so far that's mentioned it, so we'll see.
Oh, I saw it.
What's
That was you, Greg, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we're always happy to fix things if we find them, and our publisher is willing to do that too. Because the books they're either an ebook or they're print on demand. So if we make a change, it'll be fixed in later revisions.
Cool.
So like if there's a mistake in one of the books from St. Martin's Press, they'll print 10,000 copies offset printing because it's cheap, and they'll have them in a warehouse. So if there's a mistake, that mistake's living there forever, man.
Yeah.
Can I break in?
Sure.
Anybody hearing me?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're up, Horty.
Okay. I made a huge mistake, and we're on vacation. We're up in the Great Smokies at a casino, and Vicky is downstairs with my credit card, unsupervised. So I can't stay on very long. I thought probably one of the best books the club has read. Thank you for mentoring the Pacific Missile Range in Hawaii. That was my first duty station. I spent many flight hours working on the Captor mine system, which was probably, I think, the first autonomous, program it, drop it, forget it. It'll kill what it's programmed to do. So your stuff about the drones 4 decades later is totally believable to me. The only criticism I have of your book is, and maybe it's just my reading, but how did Venezuela end? Did we overthrow them? Did the girl die? It just.
Yeah. So plot threads, so we write a lot of points of view, and we have a lot of plot threads, and we always face the issue at the end of which ones do you tie off and which ones were there for just to move the story along. That was one. The Venezuela angle was one where we decided that it was going to be one where we left it hanging. That's always a decision, because when you're closing out a book, you're faced with there's a certain amount of real estate you have between when the book ends and the closeout chapters. And if you overload it, it becomes a little tedious. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we get it wrong. We haven't heard that criticism before, but I can see where you're coming from, because you get invested in characters, right? And then you want to know that it all ends. Either it ends okay, or it ends and they get their just desserts.
Well, David, as a suggestion, if JR was just down in Uruguay, right? You can just make the hook right there.
Yeah, so I was down in Uruguay in February. Yeah.
Okay, it was you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I do a lot of research trips. At least that's what I tell the IRS. Nobody works for the IRS, do they? No. Okay. Maybe I'll have to edit this, Chip.
Yeah.
Could I ask? I got a couple, but one is, that book about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's pretty cool. I would guess that most of us here were pretty surprised that A, the Russians weren't 10 feet tall like we thought they were, and B, that the Ukrainians would fight like hell. And it's amazing, right? So how I don't know, what's my question? How did your storyline go compared to what we're actually seeing?
Yeah. You want to handle that, Jar?
So
No spoilers, please.
yeah, that's going to be hard answering that question, because I would tell you, I think we did pretty well on crafting a story that wound up kind of being pretty close to what's actually happened, but not for the reasons that have actually happened. We did not anticipate that the Ukrainians would be as effective as they have been. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by that, I guess, because we've had special forces troops in there training those guys since 2014. They know how to fight quite well. And then when we flooded their inventories with these advanced anti-tank weapon systems, they have been just kicking the living crap out of the Russians. And they've been using, small UAVs as spotters to coordinate, integrated fires. It's just amazing. I mean, we were talking with this West Point guy, about kind of combat tactics and whatnot when it comes to armor. And it was amazing to me how, while we're designing and writing that book, Order of Battle, we got the story done and complete and off to Severn River Publishing kind of before the invasion actually happened. And it was sort of amazing to me how much we actually did get right.
Wow.
Yeah, so we changed very little of it. I would say that I think that your read on the Russian effectiveness, we were surprised by that too. And I don't think that we were anticipating that in our story.
No.
We expected the Russians to have issues, but not the kind of just combat effectiveness issues that they're obviously having now.
But honest to God, we don't want to give it away.
Yeah.
But when you read that story, when it comes out in September, and you look back at what's actually happened, you're going to say, this is pretty amazing that these guys got this stuff right.
Congratulations, that's super.
I will say that, you know, in the reality of the world, if you take a look at the U.S. intelligence community, and all of us were, you know, watching this buildup, the Russians advancing more and more forces onto the border, it reminded me of Saddam Hussein prepping for an invasion of Kuwait. There was no way in hell it was not going to happen, right? I mean, we knew it was coming. It was all just a matter of when does he decide to go into Ukraine? So the question would be, how effective are the Ukrainians going to be? Are they going to fold within a couple of days? You can't really know that, right? It's almost impossible to forecast that, what the makeup is going to be of the individuals who are going to stand their ground or run away bravely. And the Ukrainians, honest to God, I have been so impressed, more impressed even with their president. I mean, that guy, I think all of us have seen him on TV. He has demonstrated true leadership under real pressure to stand up and really, you know, be the face of his nation. And I'm sure all of you have sort of watched the news coverage, whether it's Volodymyr Zelensky or any of the members of his cabinet, the messaging that they have delivered to the international press about what they need and what they stand for has been uniform all across the board. So everybody knows what Ukraine is standing to fight for, right? I mean, they're on the front line to defend democracy against the rise of this Russian autocracy.
It's a shame he can't run for president of the United States, isn't it?
Yeah. JR and Dave,
Yeah.
JR and Dave, I am so pleased and happy to have read that story that you wrote, Command and Control. I can't wait to read the other ones, but this one was spectacular. And so I'm a EA6B guy, but so the A6 style. So Flight of the Intruder was a good book, but it didn't make a good movie. Top Gun, because it had the other stuff, the women and that kind of stuff, Top Gun was a great movie. So anyway, you guys have the makings, what I say would be a great movie. And because you got everything in there. And I was just wondering if there's, have you thought about that, or how does that all work? Because I think, I can't wait to read the next 5, but I think you got a movie in here.
So it's probably a streaming series. Because it's very difficult to adapt a book. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to adapt a book. So Command and Control is 500 pages long. Movies are 2 hours long. So by definition, you're going to leave a lot out, right? We've had some brushes with the Hollywood community, and I would say they've uniformly been disappointing. It's an entirely different culture, and we've written a screenplay separate from this about the Falkland Islands, which is the whole story in and of itself. But knowing a little bit about Hollywood, I spent the Writers Guild Foundation, which is the Writers Guild for screenwriters, has a veterans program, and in 2018, I think it was, I did that. It's a year-long program. You meet once a month. You have a mentor. You write a screenplay, and at the end of it, you pitch it to some Hollywood person that they bring in. Went through that, so I learned enough about Hollywood to be dangerous, and it's a wonder any movie ever gets made. Honest to God, it's chaos. It's disorganized chaos. So we'd be very pleased to have somebody pick up our book and want to make a movie about it, but we're not holding our breath, honestly.
But just out of curiosity, have you guys talked to James Webb about his experiences about publishing? I mean, turning his manuscript into movies?
We have not.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to sit with a small group a few years ago with him at supper, and he talked about the Rules of Engagement movie that he did with Samuel Jackson, Tommy Lee Jones.
Right.
And it's a fascinating story, to the point where at one point in time, the producers changed the script to make the Marines look like they're bad guys killing people indiscriminately. And he walked off the set and refused to participate.
Yeah.
And he said the next day, Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson called him and said, "What's up? Why aren't you here?" And he told them. So they walked off the set too. And they all refused to participate until they put the script back to the original script and left the Marine Corps intact. And he had some phenomenal stories, but he might be a really good asset to talk to in your push to move to Hollywood.
Yeah, it's not something we have the contacts to do at this moment, but what more and more people read it, more and more people like it, it gets more visibility.
I agree with Walt. I think these would be like, don't turn the TV off or don't stop the movie. They're that good.
We think so too.
Yeah, this is definitely a 10 episode series.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw what they did with Jack Ryan, the first season was phenomenal, just phenomenal. I mean, if somebody wanted to do that with one of our books, I am on board. Absolutely. The second season I was less impressed with, but the first season was just phenomenal.
I just want to say, if you guys want to really have an interesting adventure kind of, you've probably heard about this 3-season series that Netflix has. It's called Servant of the People. And if you haven't heard, I'm telling you.
That's the Zelensky one, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's all, they speak in Russian, but there's English subtitles on the bottom. And so sometimes there's a lot of screaming and, you have to kind of, but it's pretty damned interesting. My son and I have just watched the first season. That's 13 episodes. And Netflix wisely just released season 2 and 3. It's available now, which we haven't started it yet. But what an insight into how they think over there and how they look at their government and the people of Ukraine and what leadership means. You see Zelensky and you can see the seeds of greatness in how he operates, playing a fictional president of Ukraine. And it's amazing. I highly recommend it. Servant of the People.
Several years ago, in fact, probably over 10 years ago, there was a Robert Redford movie. I think it was 3 Days of the Condor.
Oh,
and he was a CIA. He was a CIA book reader. Look for similarities in the CIA operations. Have you guys gotten any calls from the government or anything like that that's trying to intimidate you? Hey, shut this shit down.
Nope. So they would come after JR first, unless they looked at my search history.
So how much of the emergence threat group is close to reality, JR?
Totally fiction.
Okay.
But I will say that the concept of bringing analysts together with case officers and paramilitary people in the Special Activities Division and cyber folks and all that stuff, CIA actually started moving in that direction a while ago. That was something they learned in the process of supporting the global fight against Salafist jihadism. How do you track down these terrorist groups? And by bringing everybody together as an intelligence team, you were far more effective than keeping everything separate, distinct, and sort of siloed. And so CIA and the special operations community and DoD work very closely together on those kinds of things. And so that was really sort of the framework that we used to sort of build this concept of the emerging threats group. And we just kind of created it, out of thin air and placed it at CIA because it seemed like the right place to put Don Riley to sort of lead that team. I will tell you that I deployed over to Afghanistan for a month in February and March of 2005. And I went in there with SEAL Team 6. And my job, I was on the Navy staff at that point. My assignment from the Director of Naval Intelligence was to rebuild the Navy's HUMINT capability. And so I went in there with SEAL Team 6 to take a look at their operations and also to take a look at the, kind of the Joint Special Operations Task Force or Navy operation side, is they were partnered up with the agency and other entities already. And this is, 2004 timeframe. So 2004, 2005, they've been doing it. So to me, it was just sort of a natural progression to figure out this is the way we want to build our capability in this book. I mean, we're many, many years later. All of that information has come out in the public after the Bin Laden raid about, JSOC's involvement and everything else. So the stuff that we put in our books, we have worked very, very hard to make sure that we're technically accurate wherever possible. And everything we've pulled from the internet, from open source material to make sure we're not giving anything away. Because David and I both still obviously care very deeply about making sure that the men and women out there who are on the pointy end of things, that we don't do anything to put them in danger. Because if there is somebody like Robert Redford reading books, looking at ways to screw the United States over, we don't want to give anything away, right?
You want to talk a little bit about how you developed the characters using the Academy connection for a lot of the young people in the early books anyway?
Yeah,
And actually, some of those are continuing on into these books
Still
too.
there.
Yeah. So that was part of our design initially, as we started to figure out what that first story was going to be, Weapons of Mass Deception. We knew, write what you know, right? So David and I are both Naval Academy grads, just like you guys. And we wanted to make sure that we were paying attention to that background and bringing attention to the Naval Academy. So those first three core characters, our protagonists that we developed, were all Naval Academy midshipmen. And then you see the progression of their lives through that first book up until a point where they're sort of, 04 level officers, essentially equivalents. And that, following the career path of those individuals, sort of helped us frame the storyline around what they would be doing at those respective ranks and with that level of experience. And I think it worked out pretty well. Now, if all of you started with Command and Control, then you know Don Riley, but you don't really know a lot of the other previous characters very well and how they came to be. So if you're interested, you can go back and read the first 4 books and really get a lot of detail about those individuals and the experiences that they went through before we get to Command and Control.
Okay.
I really enjoyed reading about the young, I guess she's a lieutenant, that goes from the threat group and then she goes on to the sub.
Yep.
And the way that you have pitched her is perfect. I just found that really, she's exciting, she's good, she's professional, and the whole the stuff that you sometimes read about of men and women working together, it just is done very, very well. I really enjoyed her character. Is she in the earlier books also?
Yeah, so in Rules of Engagement, so JR mentioned we started out with 3 midshipmen. So it actually starts out when they graduate, and they're 2 of them graduating and 1 actually gets washed out medically. The one who gets washed out medically is Don Riley, and Don goes to MIT and ends up back at the CIA as a computer whiz. The other 2 continue on in their careers. The first book covers actually a large span of time. It's, I don't know how many years, it's pushing 10 years, right? So
13 years.
Yeah, so we found that by the time we got to the 3rd book, we were aging out the characters. If we were staying true to, this guy's in 04, is he really going to be on a raid? Probably not, right? So we brought in 3 new midshipmen. So Don goes back to the academy as an instructor, and he's currently working at Cybercom, goes back to the academy as an instructor and has 3 sort of whiz kids, and he brings them in as a team. And that's Rules of Engagement. That's the book about cyber warfare. One of those is Janet. And when he forms the Emerging Threats group at the end of Rules of Engagement, it's either the end of Rules of Engagement or the beginning of Pandora. He brings the 3 of them in. They're now graduated. Brings the 3 of them in, but Janet only agrees to come in for 1 tour, for her short tour. So during command and control, she's actually leaving and she's going out to be a department head on a sub. So I love writing the submarine scenes. I was a nuke for 6 years. The hardest part about it is the Virginia class is the state of the art now, and it's nothing like an LA class sub. I watched an obscene amount of videos about Virginia class submarines to sort of get my headspace around. I mean, when you're raising a periscope, you're not raising a periscope, literally raising a periscope. You're just pushing a button and a mast goes up. There's no hole penetration anymore, and all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, very cool stuff like that.
I could tell when you wrote the book, you were thinking exactly that, because you made such a point of this is not raising anything.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit, but it's not going through between the hull. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that in the first 4 books, we didn't really do much with submarines, and David was just itching to be able to write something about submarines. Yeah. And so when I started doing the outline for what we thought was going to be book 5, which we eventually broke into Command and Control and Counter-Strike, I specifically made sure that a lot of that story included submarine operations. And so when I gave David that outline, back in the way we were doing it back then, he was ecstatic to see how many chapters for submarine warfare he was able to write.
Some real nuclear operations here.
I didn't think you could make submarine operations exciting, but that piece that you guys did was, I mean, you were sitting on the edge of your chair reading that part of the God, there were a couple of things I thought, how can that possibly be exciting in subs? You guys did a great job.
Well, you need to read the next book too. Absolutely, it's great.
Can't wait.
Just for that.
So actually, so the interesting thing about Counter-Strike is naturally, so the book is set up. It's, this happens in chapter 1. It's a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. It's a heavily thought out plan, and it's a 10-day plan. So the book is divided into 10 days, and it's a pace. So you're going through day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And it was really interesting to write it because we had to. So when we were back and forth, when we wrote that part of the original book, JR delivered me an outline, which was how China would invade Taiwan. I'm like, well, that's great, but we got to put a story behind it, right? But we start with the backbone of it was this is how it would happen, or probably happen, could happen, and then we layered the story and the characters and all that other stuff on top of it, which is it's just a fun process.
Can't wait.
Yeah, David and JR, we have a deceased class. His youngest son is a missionary over in Taiwan, and he and his Taiwanese wife are trying so far unsuccessfully to get out of Taiwan and back to the United States. So his mother Molly is definitely very worried about them.
Yeah, so in my previous life and in high tech, I've been to Taiwan and China and many Asian countries, many. I've probably been to Taiwan, I don't know, 50 times. So I know it, especially parts of it. So one reason why the Hsinchu Science Park is in the book is because I've been there. I spent many weeks there.
Now, David and JR, in your ebook version of Command and Control, you kind of have a lead into Counter-Strike. I assume that was for the ebook only, right? Not for your paperback.
I'll tell you just a minute. I think so. Yep, it's just yes, it's just on the ebook.
Okay.
Because it's an instant buy, right? So, somebody keeps going, they read the first chapter, they're like, keep going. Give me my $5. Keep going.
Now, there's one great line in there. I can't remember it exactly. I'm curious as to who came up with this. It was something to the effect like junior officers think tactically and flag officers think strategically, which means logistics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true.
That was probably JR.
Oh. Well, great line, Jay.
Yeah, so is it, I mean, you know, we've used the names of real people a few times. Chip has been a huge supporter of ours since the very first book, the very first Kickstarter. He was probably the first one, I think, to plunk his money down and get hard copies. So when we have a lot of characters, right? So it's often difficult to come up with good names. So sometimes we're like, hey, you know, why don't we use Chip's name here? So the original Rear Admiral Chip Sherritt was a bit part, but as the story grew, the role grew, and he becomes a major character in the second book. It's a huge part. It's a huge part. But he fills the shoes well.
The neat part is that you tapped into a lot of the other Academy grads that we have breakfast with once a month.
Yeah.
Doug Baden is in there as a
Yep.
as a Army general, and Sal Mondelli. I asked Sal to be on this call, and he's on a plane right now. He said, I'd love to be there, but I can't.
Yeah, but that's because isn't he the one that got killed off
Yeah.
on the steps of the war college? I wouldn't be on the
So
call either.
yeah, it's
I got killed off.
No spoilers, but sometimes the people we name die. It's just...
You know, Chip, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned his name because I thought, I know that name from somewhere.
Yeah.
I just couldn't place it.
He probably put you on a report once upon a time.
No doubt.
Exactly.
Form 2, well said.
The challenge is when we decide to use names of people that we know, we have the long debate. Are we going to kill this guy off or not?
And that was the first question I asked them when they said, can we use your name? I said, am I a good guy or bad guy? And do I live or do I die? And they said, you're a good guy, but we haven't decided on if you're going to die or not.
Yeah. You made the cut this time, but there's still a few more books to write, Chip.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started Command Control, I was uncomfortable because I didn't know whether the minister, is this on the good side? Is he good or is he bad? And the guy working for him, and I apologize, I'm terrible with names, but he's the leading character in this thing. But I always thought, I think it's good, but he's really bad. It was really cool. Now I hope the minister goes down, because I think at the end of this thing, he's still around at the end of Command and Control.
But don't give it away for Walt. Make him buy the damn book.
We're not going to comment on that.
That character is extremely well written, though. That was really
unbelievable,
really well done. Really
so well done.
Yeah,
we had a lot of fun with it. We had a lot. So it's very difficult to figure out how much information to give and how much to hold back and where to. There's two, I'll call them tricks, but they're not tricks. It's a craft, right? One is on technical details. I mean, a lot of probably the best comments we get is you write a Tom Clancy book without the parts that I don't want to read. So I mean, do we really need to know the muzzle velocity of this gun? Probably not, right? And that didn't really resonate with us until we did we have a mailing list. It goes out every Sunday morning. And we did a survey a couple of years ago. And one of the questions we asked, are you a man or a woman? Where do you live? Just basic stuff. And it turns out more than half of our readers almost half of our readers are women, which shocked us. We expected it was going to be 80-20, maybe 70-30. It's 47-53.
Wow.
Women, men. And part of the reason, which when we talk to readers, is that women like this kind of stuff too, but they get bored with overly technical jargon, right? So we always try to explain what it is, and we try to give enough technical detail so it's authentic, but not drown you in, every little thing to show that we did the research, because you sort of got to trust us, I guess.
If I could, what I'd like to highlight for all of you, and maybe for those of you who've read the books, this will track in. These are character-driven stories. We have a plot, but you get to know these characters inside and out because you're seeing the story through their eyes. And I have to say, David is masterfully skilled at telling that story through point of view characters. I'm a narrative writer, so I don't do very, very well on that. And that was actually one of the things we had to work out in the very first book we wrote, is how are we going to do this? Who's going to write what? And I frankly much prefer his style of writing, that point of view character, because you can get inside that individual's mind. And you've gotten to know those characters because you know what they are thinking while they're having conversations with other characters in the story. So I really kind of concentrate on the plot, the key things that happen, the technical details, and David is the one that masterfully brings out who these characters are, what motivates them. And that's why you like the story, because you're reading about people and their real feelings, you know, things they're going through as they're going through this whole story. Average individuals, maybe even really talented individuals, thrown into really difficult circumstances, and how do they deal with it? I think what you'll probably be surprised if you go back and read some of the earlier books, maybe even you saw it in Command and Control, but some of our villains, you know, our antagonists, you start to feel a little sympathy for them because you kind of get to know who they are, right? And you say, why, you know, okay, he's doing some bad things, but I don't hate this guy, you know, so that's one of the things I think that that has been really interesting about this process, is sort of learning how to bring out these characters. I mean, they're national security thriller stories, so you have to have suspense in them, but you also expect action. And what makes us a little different, rather than the heavy detail, is that they're character driven. You get to know these people.
I like that from the leadership perspective. I like that, you know, sometimes you see that they have very strong convictions. Sometimes they're conflicted about the directions that they should move.
Yep.
I've enjoyed that part.
You know, I'll tell you guys a little story. When I was assigned to Special Operations Command from 94 to 98, in 96, 97 timeframe, we had an opening come up in the Intel Directorate there, the J2 at U.S. Special Operations Command, for what was called the XO, the Executive Officer in the division. Now that's an Army term, and that's like the person who runs the entire administrative process for the division or for the directorate. And it's normally an 04, a senior 04 gets that job. Well, I put in for it as a relatively junior 03. And I interviewed with the J2, who was a senior Army colonel. Don Faint was his name. And I told him I wanted the job, and I told him why. And he said, okay, you're hired. And so he took me, you know, on faith. So I got to sit in with all these 06s who were department heads as a junior 03. And I watched them struggle with trying to make decisions about how to manage people and resources and responsibilities, and all these very high-end intelligence operations that were supporting special operations units and missions all around the world. And I realized every single day, these guys are struggling trying to figure out what to do. And as a junior 03, you're looking at these senior 06s figuring, well, these guys have it wired. They know exactly what they're doing, and they don't. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me as a junior officer, to realize that it doesn't matter how senior you become, you're trying to figure it out every single day. And part of leadership is, how do you manage your own internal mechanisms of control so you don't panic under these circumstances? And we've, you know, David and I have talked about those things as we've drafted these characters and these storylines, but that was a great lesson for me to learn as a junior officer.
Oh. Yeah, and David, those characters, I mean, they're all tremendous. And as a reader, I got involved with all of them, and I was and from your point, JR, you know, I had a lot of empathy for the struggles that they went through. So your characters are terrific. Very, very well done.
Yeah.
I share it, Rear Admiral Sherritt's a little sketchy, you know.
Yeah, well,
I expected him to be doing.
working with tough raw material there.
Yeah, well, you don't have much to work with, but you know, if you have him doing some pull-ups on the flag bridge a couple of times just to kind of refresh himself, he'd be much more believable to me. Or a couple of iron crosses, I guess, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I'm waiting for the edition that has Chip's wife Suki on the cover of one of the books.
Yeah.
I want to see.
Series.
I want to see what she looks like. Mike wants to see the nape of her neck.
Yeah, I think it's something else he wants to see, not the name of it.
So
Cookie
this
is the centerfold.
well, this was very kind of you guys to give us your time. And I can't tell you from my perspective, Chip told me about your books and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed them. I literally read them in 1 weekend because I just couldn't put them down.
Yeah, it's always humbling, right? Is we spend 6 months writing something and somebody emails me and says, yeah, I read it in one night. I'm like, really? So on the one hand, you know, you're like, man, do you know how long I spent? But on the other hand, somebody was that into it and you captured their attention for that long. It's incredibly humbling. It's incredibly flattering.
Yeah,
So
I
thank you for that.
I could not put them down, you know, and fortunately I got both of them in the same mailing. So I was able to keep going on, but you guys do great work.
Thank you so much.
I look forward to
Appreciate
many
it.
years of your of your writing. So
I can tell you, to make you feel better, my lips get tired reading. So it took a couple of weeks to read it. And at that rate, it was perfect. So, and I can't wait to read all of them. Thanks so much. Great work, guys.
You are very welcome. I appreciate it.
I just want to bring out one point that JR and David mentioned at the beginning that, you know, probably went over most of your heads, is that, you know, when you offer a book up for sale on Amazon, for example, yeah, you can do it as a paperback, an ebook. And of course, one of the big decisions you have to make is, you know, how to price the ebook.
Yeah.
And as, you know, JR and David know, that the ebook, I mean, it's almost all profit. I mean, there's hardly any cost to that at all.
Yeah, it's a 70% royalty. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you're trying to figure out, you know, how do you balance between what you're charging for the paperback as opposed to, you know, you don't want to say here, you know, paperback's $14.99 and you can have the ebook for $2.99 or something like that. It looks a little ridiculous. But the other thing is that one of the disadvantages of selling a paperback book, and I don't know if you run into this yet or not, is that you know, people here locally that I know that will, you know, read a, you know, a couple of my books, they'll go, you know, I really liked the book and I gave it to Joe Blow, and then Joe Blow gave it to Jane Doe. So what happens is that, you know, for every paperback book you sell, it gets read by about 5 different people with no retribution, you know, to you at all. So it's much more financially lucrative, as they mentioned, to actually sell your book, you know, via ebook. And Amazon offers this thing called Kindle Unlimited. And what people can do is they can download 10 books a month and read them for free. But as an author, you get paid, was it 4.5 cents a page or something like that?
Yeah, it's like 0.45 cents. It's like half a penny a page.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, commercially speaking, so Severn River, we have a profit sharing deal with them. So they handle all the costs of the production, editors, covers, ads, everything, and then we split profits with them. It's worked out tremendously well. The only reason why we signed the contract actually was that there was a clause in the contract that if we didn't make a certain amount of money within a certain period of time, we could take all the rights back, which is unheard of in a publishing contract. But they were very confident that they could, you know, promote these books, and they've done a fabulous job. So to your point about people reading the paperback, I mean, yeah, I think that your point's correct, that obviously we would like to get paid every time somebody read our book, but by the same token, we're in it for the readers, because the reader, if they like it, they're going to go back and find the next one. So we're in it for the reader to read the whole series. And if, however they get introduced to it, whether it's an audiobook, whether it's a ebook, whether it's a secondhand paperback, I actually don't care as long as they read it and they like it. And the number one way that books get picked up today still is by word of mouth, because there's thousands of books being published every day, and and somebody picking up a book, it's 6 or 8 hours of their time, depending on how fast you're, or it could be a lot longer. Yeah, depending on if your lips get tired or not. But so people, it's an investment of their time is the biggest thing. So somebody who they either, when somebody goes to look for a new book, the first thing I look for is an author that they recognize and that they're comfortable with. And the second thing is if somebody they know and trust recommends the book to them.
Yep. And
then they'll buy it. Still today, even with ads and everything else, it's word of mouth is still your best advertisement.
And JR and David, I'm sure you're the type of people that you have a passion for writing, and whether you sold only 100 books or 10,000 books, you would still keep on writing no matter what, right?
So I wouldn't start this profession for the money. Let's just put it that way. I mean, really, especially in series, you don't really, it's not financially viable until you have several books in a series, because people sometimes need to be incented to pick up book number one, or you need to spend a lot of money on ads. So Severn River knows what they're doing. They're selling full price books up front. I think the first one is $4.99, I think it is. That they handle pricing, they handle all the advertising, they handle covers, and they know what's the optimum price point for that kind of book in that market.
Right.
And that's how they price it. They're extremely good at what they do. Andrew, I think after he got out, he was a helo pilot and got out. He worked for P&G in brand management, I think, and really understands how markets work. And it shows. I mean, these guys know what they're doing.
Does Severn River do an outreach to filmmakers also?
I don't think so. So typically when you sign a publishing contract, you hold the rights to the book to publish the book in whatever format, ebook, print, audio, is part of the publishing contract. Usually rights are reserved for film and TV and games and all that kind of stuff. That it's a separate contract, and usually you need separate representation for it.
JR and David, I enjoy your Sunday newsletter.
Oh,
and
great.
I can't remember which one of you wrote it, but the Christmas story is a good one.
Yep.
That's David.
Love it.
That was mine, yeah. So I write science fiction on the side, and so the story behind the Christmas story is after I had started writing, and it might have been the first Christmas after I started writing, and we're getting close to Christmas, and I said to my wife, hey, what do you want for Christmas, honey? She said, you know what I want? I want an original David Bruns short story just for me about Christmas. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, all right. So we had when we were first married, we had a dog named Benny. Benny didn't last long, but in the story, there's a dog named Rennie, because when our kids were growing up and they asked for a story, I always told them a story about a dog named Rennie. So I wrote this story, and she just loved it. She drags it out every Christmas. And somebody asked me if I would publish it just to the newsletter, and she agreed, but that's the only one that she'll let go. The other one, she won't let anybody else have them.
Well, you got a number of short stories too, David, available, right?
We do.
Yeah. So I write science fiction, and most of them are science fiction short stories. I have a couple science fiction novels, one with another collaborator, and then a couple on my own. But the current contract we're under means that we don't really have time for other projects. It's just a book every 6 months, a 500-page book every 6 months that's a lot of work.
We do have 4 companion novellas for the
Yeah.
first 4 novels that we wrote together. So if you take a look at those first 4 novels, Weapons of Mass Deception, Jihadi Apprentice, Rules of Engagement, and the Pandora Deception, there are 4 novellas that are companion pieces to each one of those, and they tell a backstory or some sort of unique aspect of one of those characters' lives that's in those stories, those novels.
So
And
the website
those are only available through ebook.
So the website where all this is available is davidbruns.com. Last name is Bruns, not Burns, Bruns. And all the information about the books is there. The first 4, the companion novellas, and any science fiction if you want to try some of that.
I just put that in the chat. I also put the radio show that I do every week in the chat. If anybody wants to listen to a podcast or a radio show called National Security This Week. So
Why don't you talk about your most recent one, JR?
so I just had that show this morning. It's every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time on a little radio station called KYMN out of Northfield. And I had Dr. Namrata Goswami and Lieutenant Colonel Peter Garrettson, who retired from the Air Force. He was class of 91 at the Air Force Academy. I had them on and we talked about great power competition in space. It was a fascinating show. So that's the most recent one that's on that link that I put in the chat for you. That'd be a good one to start off with, just to get a flavor for what that radio show is. It lasts about an hour, but there's a bunch of really great ones in there. I actually had a former U.S. Army commander for Europe on the show, not too long after the Russians invaded. So that'd be a good one to listen to. I had Mike Studeman, who's a 2-star Navy Admiral Intel officer, who's the Director of Intelligence for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. He and I actually are good friends. I had him on the show. That's a great one to listen to if you want to hear some really good stuff about China. So there's some great shows on there. I think if there's any of those topics that you look through the archives on that you know the topic interests you, you'll enjoy those shows. So I've had great guests on there.
And you've both been interviewed by Al Malmberg.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yes. Al has had us on several times, actually.
Yes.
He's always a great hour. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I just got a text from him. I invited him to join the conversation tonight. He said he couldn't log in, so I was talking to Larry to see if we could get it fixed up, but I don't think we got it resolved. So
No.
otherwise, he'd be on with us right now, and he wouldn't be interviewing you himself. He'd just enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, Walter, you've been on his program too, right?
I was. Yeah, Chip set that up and I enjoyed talking. I think it was my ejection from
Yep.
many years ago, but it was fun. It's difficult though to be on a radio show when you know people are gonna be listening, but it was fun. And he's such a good he almost like an advisor as you're talking to him. So he makes it so easy.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing my interview with him. It was a lot of fun.
Anybody else want to talk to him? All right. Anybody else have any other questions for the boys?
Really enjoy them. Keep at it.
Thank you so much.
Any Dave and JR, any things that we can do to help other than just share the news that these books are great and available and you got to get into them.
Tell all your friends. Yep, that's the number one thing.
Yeah.
Hey, Father's Day is coming, so
Yeah.
People can ask for books for Father's Day.
Yeah.
Hey, Chip, are you going to make a link to this recording? So that,
Larry's got it.
okay, because I think that would be good. I'd love to have. There's a couple of people I'd like to see that could watch this and enjoy it also.
Yeah, there was a number of people that I invited that weren't able to make it, and I'm sure they would love seeing it as well. So.
Yeah, with the recording, this will be a large file, so you can't email it around normally. I use a service called WeTransfer where you can list people and then you can come in and pick it up that way. And I don't know, David, if would you want to make a link on your website where people could come listen to?
Sure. If you send me the information, I'll see if I can. My son's a computer science engineer, so he's my technical advisor on all things that I can't figure out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the way we'll plan to go. I'll go ahead and take this file of the recording. I'll use that service I told you about to get it over to David, and he'll post it on his website then.
That'll be great. All right, guys. Wonderful evening. Great interview, and thanks for your time spending it with our class and classmates.
Yeah,
Certainly a pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a
Yep.
good
Very
evening.
much.
It was an honor to be a part of it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good luck to you.
take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Larry.
Thanks.
Thanks, Turns.
See you, Polo.
See you, Trapper.
Thanks for joining, Walt.
Yep.
Thanks for calling me, Wally.
Yeah. Go back to bed.
You can't see it, Mark. You can't.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing
We
good.
can't see him, Mark. You got your, there you go.
The blankets are too high. Yeah.
All right, I'm out of here.
All right, buddy.
Good night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Jay.
The only problem I had with reading the book with your name in it is every time I read your name, I saw your face.
That kind of ruins the story, doesn't it?
Does.
Your face that's there. You don't have that with other characters, but when you
Yeah.
have your name there.
Yeah. Well, I asked them when they make the movie if I can be in it. They said, sure, you can be in it, but we're going to get somebody else to play your character.
Yeah.
Certainly somebody younger.
Yeah. Yeah.
To do the stunts, of course.
What, working out on the flag bridge? I think I can handle that.
Yeah. All right. Have a good evening.
All right, guys. Thanks
See you.
again.
Yeah.
Night all.
Thanks.